And the way that I help to support workers in California is I represent them. And when they are victims of discrimination, harassment, or retaliation, I go after those people that do the discriminating, harassing, retaliating. We also do civil rights and fire cases now with all the fires going on. But the way that I represent people is we take on employers, often municipalities, and protect the rights of the employees with lawsuits and trial when necessary.
Thank you, Attorney Gage. And Janae, can you tell us a little bit about your HR consulting and your experience in HR and how you assist California workers?
Sure. So I've been in HR for 20 years. So my job is more internal. Before we get to the attorneys, before we get to, any kind of picketing, what I do is I work with the employers and I work with the staff and to ensure that they're complying with California labor laws and regulations, which are designated, to protect workers' rights. This means promoting a safe and inclusive work environment and providing the necessary trainings and resources to the staff as well as the leadership team. I work closely with management to implement these policies by writing employee handbooks and making sure that I do check-ins with the staff. That's one of the luxuries of doing this consulting work. I can be more hands-on before we get to the legal aspect of a lot of things. But sometimes you do need that legal push. So we're happy that Allison and Bradley are here to push in those. So yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you. We really thought it was really important for all of our panelists to be here today, but really Janae, because often you hear HR is not really for the employee, it's for the employer. So we were hoping to have someone that was willing to, share a little bit more on how to navigate not just your employer, but, how to navigate HR and how to work with HR, because that generally is the first step before you can even get to an Allison or get to a Brad.
Correct.
So with that, Assemblymember McKenna, in light of the ongoing changes in the federal workplace protections, how is California ensuring that state level protections remain strong for workers? And what steps did your committee take to ensure that employee rights are safeguarded?
Well, first, folks successfully went after affirmative action in DC. DEIA is a way to address that rollback. Now we're seeing efforts to undermine DEIA, and I think it's detrimental to nearly 60 years of policies and gains to ensure equality and to ensure equity, and level the playing field. What people must understand is that these efforts are well resourced, but the power of our collective purses and wallets also speak volume. If communities take a stand and stop patronizing those who went to undo and undermine DEIA, it will hurt the bottom line. And that's what matters to them most. Sure, there'll be a certain level of struggle and maybe even sacrifice, but change doesn't happen without such struggle and sacrifice. As for California, I generally don't foresee this affecting existing workplace protections available to workers because we have a number of very strong worker protection policies and law, and I'm sure more will come. Not only must we collectively fight, but we have to get more creative in the way we fight. That's exactly what the other side is doing. And I'm here to tell you that we in the state legislature will be doing some civil rights bills that will protect California. They may not protect the United States from Washington, but we will protect California with future policy. Thank you.
Thanks, Assemblymember. We know that policy is extremely important, and that's really where all of this starts. So thank you for being here to talk about it from a legislative law perspective, where laws are actually made and then, enforced throughout the state. So appreciate that. So Brad, given the recent federal policy changes, such as trying to revoke the Equal Employment Opportunity Executive Order and the rollback of DEIA programs, do you anticipate any changes affecting the work environments and the protections available to workers in California? Because we know that people are nervous. We hear people aren't showing up to work. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to navigate. So are you anticipating any big changes for California in this space?
Well, first, I want to say thank you for having me here. I forgot to say that before. So thank you. As far as all these federal changes, even before this new oligarchy, we had a lot better protection in California than federally. And so I don't think I've ever done a federal employment case unless it's a federal worker, because there's not any reason to. Our protections and laws in California have been stronger for years, and we're going to hopefully continue to have those rules and protections here. People should not be afraid to go to work unless they are
Muchas
someone
personas
that
tienen miedo a ir al trabajo porque
the
están
president
nerviosos,
is now targeting and
porque ahora
might
este
get deported
presidente
because of it,
está llegando a
if
ciertos
that's the
inmigrantes.
employer. But I think most California
Pero
employers
creo que
are
la
resisting
mayoría de
that
los
kind
jefes de California
of
están
oppression as
ahorita.
well. So although I think what's going on federally is horrible and problematic, fortunately in California, we have people like our Assembly member McKenna to help to keep fighting for our rights and protect us. And we're doing that also on a local and national level. I'm working with the NAACP. So I think you're going to see some grassroots in that regard as well to help people federally. But stay in California, sue in California, be protected. That's the message.
Well, we appreciate that. We do have people from all over, but I do love being here in California. But with that, Allison, what are the basic legal rights that every worker in California has, particularly when it comes to issues like workplace discrimination, wages, and the right to a safe working environment? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so here in California, in terms of wages, we have a minimum wage here that's higher than the national minimum wage. We have overtime laws in place, and there are wage theft protections. Wage theft being making sure you're being paid for all your hours work in accordance with our laws. And workers who usually reach out to the center are usually prone to wage theft because they come from more vulnerable and marginalized communities. And they work in sectors where the protections are oftentimes not as comprehensive as other sectors, such as domestic workers, day laborers, agricultural workers. Um, there are laws in place to protect workers, but we still see wage theft all the time. It's the biggest issue that workers call the center with. So it's something that we're constantly working on, trying to help workers file with the labor commissioner and help them move those cases forward. For discrimination and harassment, in California, employers can't fail to hire, discipline, fire, or treat an employee any differently in terms of in terms and conditions of employment on the basis of a membership to a protected class. So you can't harass workers based on these protected classes, and that is something, again, where the law is there, it's very comprehensive, but we often see the biggest gaps in the enforcement.
All right.
And in terms, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, the last thing I was just going to talk about was like the safety. We do have workers are all entitled to a safe work environment. That's very dependent on your industry. But when it comes to protecting yourself against retaliation in the workplace, it's always best to go in groups. So power in numbers. If you go with another employee to talk about a workplace issue or about a wage issue or a safety issue, it's considered a concerted action, which gives you a protection from retaliation. So that is something we're always telling workers is there's power in numbers and there's also protections in numbers.
Thank you for that, Allison. I didn't even know about the power in numbers. I think a lot of times people feel like it might just be happening to them. And they go by themselves because you don't want to, pollute the work environment. And then there's like embarrassment and shame. So thank you for pointing out that there is a power in numbers, even in this space, for people to feel empowered if other people are talking about it or it's happening, that they can come together for themselves or for the greater good to help move something like this forward. And for the participants, just so you know, we will be dropping some resources in the chat. So phone numbers to EEOC, Department of Labor, places that you can go to report if you are having these issues. So make sure you continuously check the chat. So Janae, What are some of the most common workplace violations that you encounter, and what should workers do immediately when they find themselves in these situations? And of course, what's important about documenting this, and how do you document something like this? Because that's kind of the first thing people ask for, and it's not Brad's turn to talk, but I'm sure or Allison's, but I'm sure they're going to ask you, like, have you documented this? How can you prove this type of thing?
So the first thing, and I tell people this all the time, um, document everything from the very beginning. When you feel as though something is happening, your intuition, document everything, especially when you think that something is happening to you or around you. So a lot of times what I hear in my many years, I've had, managers that are, discriminating against their staff, or, someone said something inappropriately in the lunchroom or something like that. And staff are like, well, who do I go to? Well, document it first. And when I say document, I mean, we're going to go elementary, the when, where, why, and how, right? And I think along the way, if you catch all of those and you document this and you start to see a pattern, and you keep going, that's when you tell someone. So a lot of organizations, what they do is they say, go to your supervisor, they say, go to HR, they say, go to leadership. I think the best way to go about it is for you to go ahead and if you feel as though it's falling into one of the categories, especially that Allison was referring to, if it has to do with your wages, any type of discrimination, you want to document that. And you want to go ahead and move forward to HR. There's no such, you cannot, especially in California, there's no retaliation, especially when you have to follow a process as an HR professional. What happens is that sparks an investigation for us. And then that's a process. That's an investigation process that I follow in particular, because we want to make sure that we're fair and that we're considerate of every party that's being involved.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Janae. So that leads me to Brad and Allison. Brad, I'll let you go first, and then you, Allison. You've done all this documentation, you ran it up the corporate ladder. When do you consider really filing a formal complaint, or involving legal, or reaching out to an attorney for some help? Like where's that fine line? How often does something like this have to happen? One time, 10 times? Does there need to be a history? When do I say, you know what, I'm calling Allison or I'm calling Brad because I need to take this to the next level?
Well, it really depends on the severity of each act. Sometimes one act can be so outrageous that you want to file at that point, like a sexual assault, for example, or certain comments at some points. Other times you want to see additional problems, so you look at the totality of the circumstances. And that gives you a chance to decide how severe is it. Because when you're looking at something, let's say harassment, it has to be severe or pervasive. Severe means just what like it sounds, how bad is it? Pervasive means how often does it occur? So the more often that it occurs, the more pervasive it is, and that creates a problem. Sometimes it's a matter of how intolerable is the situation. So you kind of look at things from at least I look at it from a common sense perspective. How bad does it seem to be? Certainly, if there are a number of people together experiencing similar problems, that strengthens the case and makes it more necessary to pursue something also, because this is something that's more pervasive from a policy standpoint within an organization. So you want to look at that. Now, one thing about groups that I've been noticing lately, a lot of the California judges are starting to try to break out lawsuits that have multiple plaintiffs into individual claims. That's very different from what I've seen in the past 39 years of doing this. And in the past, if you had a group, they just had everybody try it at once because it's faster for the courts, but it's also better for the employees to do it that way, because it's not where an employer can say, oh, this is just a crybaby, or this is a bad employee. When you've got 4 or 5 people with the same problem, maybe one is bad, maybe 2, but you can't convince most people that 5 are bad. So when you're considering all these things, it's really a matter of what the facts show, how terrible it is. If there's physical touching in a harassment case, that's worse. When there is differential treatment, for example, I have Pasadena PD cases right now where I represent most of the African-American officers there. And you look at the kinds of misconduct that are alleged against the Black officers, basically telling someone, calm down, don't use excessive force, and they get relieved of duty for 6 months. Then you've got other officers that are drinking on duty, driving police cars with guns, and they left the area when there was a fire that wound up burning someone 80% of their body, and they weren't relieved. So when you look at that, that's a good example of discrimination. So hope that helps.
No, that was great. Thank you. And Allison, anything you want to add to that? Like when do you seek legal advice when you go to the lawyer?
Sure. So when workers call our hotline, some of the questions we ask them is sort of what their goal is. It really depends on the worker. Again, retaliation is illegal, but I'm sure as Bradley can attest, it happens all the time. So the process of sort of seeking recourse for retaliation is not as quick, right, as we would like it to be. So oftentimes it really depends on what the worker wants. If the worker's goal is to get back to work and to negotiate with their employer, their goals would be different than filing a wage claim right away. So we really try to listen to clients' needs and what their priorities are and align our advice with that. Again, if you do sort of go to HR or within your company, it's really always good to bring a coworker. And like Janae mentioned, documentation is really important. I think there's oftentimes some misinformation about what documentation needs to be. It's not as, doesn't really have like a high sort of bar of like what counts as documentation. So oftentimes you could submit like screenshots, text messages, like Snapchat photos, things that you wouldn't necessarily consider as documentation, but keeping those in your pocket to like know when you do want to file a claim or when you do want to move forward with filing a formal complaint, that you have those sources of documentation. So yeah, that's definitely something that's a big part of our education component. It's just anything you can document, whether it's formal or informal, just having something and something to testify based off of is really important for workers.
So Allison, really two questions, one for you and then one for potentially you and Brett. Allison, can anyone call your hotline, or how does someone work with your organization?
Yeah, so anyone can call our hotline. We do offer like free legal assistance to low wage workers. So we base that off of the federal poverty levels. So whether you're able to get an appointment for our legal clinic that happens every week is dependent on your income. But you are welcome to call our hotline 9 to 5:30, 5 days a week. And we not only do appointments for clinic, but we offer resources all the time. We sort of can redirect workers if a different organization better fits their needs. And yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And you touched on one of the things I wanted to ask about was money. Like, are we doing things on contingency, Brad, or do you have to like pay to do this? Because that's another barrier to people really seeking out legal advice is like, I can't afford a lawyer. I live in California. So we heard Allison say, they based on the poverty line and, you can call based off of that kind of, scale income. If we weren't using a worker center, Brad, is it contingent based? Is there upfront? I know every law firm's a little bit different, but just kind of in perspective.
Well, my law firm works on a contingency fee, which means if we don't win, we don't get paid. So we do all the work. It doesn't matter if a person is poverty level or a multimillionaire, although if they're really rich, we might make them pay a little bit. That's a joke. But basically, contingency fees are based on a percentage of recovery. So if somebody was, let's say, on a 1/3 contingency fee and earned $100, the attorney's fees would be $33.33. If they got millions, then the contingency fee could be millions as well. So the benefit of a contingency fee is it sort of rewards the attorneys for hard work and good results, and it also protects the victims of discrimination, harassment, and retaliation because they know they have a lawyer who is confident in his or her skills and believes in the case because they're getting free legal work unless there is success.
No, good, thank you. So sometimes there's no upfront money, and we want people to hear that. Like, you don't have to deal with this behavior in the workplace because you feel like you can't financially afford it. You heard Allison say, depending on your income, call their office, they'll see if they could work with you. And you heard Brad say they work on contingency. He doesn't get anything if you don't get anything. So we just want people to really understand that.
And
Uh,
sometimes
Go ahead.
lawyers may not charge for their time, but they will charge for the costs, such as a filing fee, a deposition, experts, things like that. That still would be a contingency fee with no payments for the fees, but some amount for case costs. And that often depends on the ability of a client to pay and also the value of the case, how strong it seems to be.
Thank you. Allison and Janae, can you tell us what are some of the most effective ways for workers to advocate for equitable treatment in the workplace, especially when traditional routes like unionization might not be an option for them?
I'll let you go first, Alton. Go ahead.
Sure. So I mentioned briefly earlier, collective action is always something we really push in our education and when we do direct services. So it not only gives you that protection of a concerted action, but power in numbers when you organize workers to discuss issues and you present your demands as a group, oftentimes across sectors. A lot of workers are facing the same issues. It's very surprisingly, like wage theft is across all sectors. It doesn't really discriminate. So sort of coming together and like building that power and not feeling alone in the process. A huge part of the center emphasizes education. We think it's really important to educate our community so they can advocate for themselves. That could be knowing your rights. So knowing your own rights, knowing what you and your coworkers are entitled to at work, that can help you sort of identify when legal violations are happening in the workplace and sort of give you a foundation to advocate for yourself, knowing what laws we have, and then knowing when to like reach out for resources. There are lots of nonprofits, regional nonprofits, statewide nonprofits that have a lot of resources for you and government agencies that can help you report violations or offer legal consultation. So knowing when to reach out and look for resources. And when it comes to public campaigns, as I'm sure you guys are aware of at Cal Equity, they can be very useful. They can create public pressure, online campaigns, media awareness, and encouraging sort of conscious consumerism through using like the tools you have. And I think advocacy is always one of those things. You throw as many things as you can on a wall and see what sticks. So I would advocate for trying all of them, but just making sure, first and foremost, that you know your rights at work.
Thank you, Allison. Did you want to add anything to that, Janae?
Yeah, so basically all of that, and one piece of advice is purely what Allison said, educating yourself and what the rights are. There's an FEHA covered. There are so many. I'm trying to look. I'm actually looking. There's so many. There's legal. There's community engagement. There's legal aid and advocacy. Allison works for one in particular. Utilizing your resources, and also that biggest piece is before you actually get to an attorney, read your employee handbook. A lot of times organizations they've already dealt with this, so I can tell you that I have gone with so many organizations and they've said, hey, this is an issue that we have. Can we write a policy on this? So before you go to an attorney or anything like that, you want to make sure you read your employee handbook because that is an internal document that an organization can use, not against you, but to say, hey, we've documented this. We have this in writing. You actually signed off that you read it and you understood it. So that is something that you always want to make sure of before seeking any additional advice externally. Try to, know your rights and your protections, read your handbook. Those are the key things I think before outsourcing. Like I said, and also documenting everything. There is a way to go about it. I know it's in the chat, incidents and all of that, and how you can go in detail. What detail means for me, and what detail means for another person that is scared of losing their job is very different. Because I've dealt with people that say, "Well, I really don't want to say anything. I don't want to lose my job." The first thing I tell them is, in California, retaliation is against the law. So I have a series of questions that I ask. So a person can give me the screenshots. They can give me, my supervisor said this person said this person touched me inappropriately in the workplace, all of these things. But I, as an HR professional, have a list of questions that I'm going to ask you to make sure that I have a full story. So, and that's the biggest thing, is I have to have a full story to be able to start an investigation. And when there's an investigation, if you're not happy with the outcome, I also give the opportunity for leadership to make a decision on if we're going to, seek an external investigator to come in. But there is a process behind every single thing that happens. But I think the biggest thing is making sure that you know your rights and your protections, and reading that employee handbook. One thing I know in particular is people don't read the handbook until they want to prove someone wrong.
Oh,
So when you get that employee handbook and you start a new role, read the handbook. If you don't understand something, that's what HR is for. HR, majority of the time, writes the policies. And then they seek legal counsel to ensure that they have everything, all the protections in there that need to be in there. However, California is really good at putting things in there. However, sometimes people can find a loophole. Sometimes, they miss something. But know your rights and know your protections.
thank you. Thank you, Janae, for that. Okay, Assemblyman McKenna, as the chair of the Public Employment and Retirement Committee, how do you stay connected to the concerns of the everyday workers? And what are the best ways for workers across California to get involved in shaping the policies that directly impact them?
Well, I am in touch with so many labor, especially labor unions. I work with a lot of labor unions across the state. They come in, they talk to me. Any one of you guys could come to my office. You can call my scheduler, call my office, make an appointment. Sometime you can come in and meet with me in person. If I can't meet with you in person, I meet over Zoom. But I stay in touch with workers because I deal with public sector workers across the state almost every day. And so that keeps me in touch with their issues, and if there's any problems that we need to solve with policy.
Thank you. Thank you. Allison, immigrant workers, especially those in the agriculture and other industries with little oversight. We know that they face some unique barriers to asserting their rights, and they're often scared, as Brad said. They're not documented, they're not really sure, so they have other things that they're concerned about. How can we best help them advocate for themselves in these particular spaces?
Yeah, sort of touching on what we talked about earlier, we're very fortunate that California has a very expansive framework for workplace protections. So as we spoke about earlier, the immediate impact of like those federal rollbacks may be less pronounced here than in states that rely more heavily on federal framework and agencies. And like Bradley mentioned, for a very long time now, California has had very progressive and comprehensive workplace rights in place. So one of the unique barriers I think we face in California is informing workers that regardless of your immigration status, all workers have the same rights. You can file claims to the Labor Commissioner's office regardless of immigration status. And that is sort of to address the fear around immigration status right now and immigration retaliation, and to recognize that it's very real right now. But in California, your rights are the same across the board, regardless of your immigration status. So to know that, and you can file with the Labor Commissioner's office without fear of that. And again, like you mentioned, the sectors are really, certain sectors just don't have the protections, especially the communities we work most closely with, day laborers, domestic workers. They've been excluded from some of those key labor protections. So like overtime laws, those types of workplace laws. So that's definitely an area that we are trying to work with and make sure to still do your rights trainings and make sure that people just know that they are entitled to rights in the workplace, regardless of immigration status and a lot of the rhetoric going around.
Thank you, Allison. I just think it's, important to also say that it's part of the community's role to also help advocate. So having like Assemblymember McKenna here, around the policy and legislation, and having Brad here at the legal aspect, and you, Allison, working for the Workers' Rights Center, and you, Janae, more corporate, like this is how the community, gets information. And thank you for sharing that, Allison, because I know personally a lot of undocumented are really nervous about their work, right? And so to hear you say, and you and Brad say that their rights are protected too, I'm not sure that they know that, right? And even knowing that sometimes is not enough, but really thank you for sharing that, because people need to be informed about that. So to just wrap this up for the essence of time, I'm going to ask all the panelists, and Brad, we'll start with you. What are some resources that every California worker should be aware of that helps them to understand their rights and navigate workplace policies? And that could be, websites, that, any type of resource that you use or you can recommend would be great, because we want people to have something to take away from this session.
Well, probably the best way to know your rights is to contact an attorney. That's a lot easier because everything can kind of come through us. But the Department of Fair Employment and Housing, which is now known as the California Civil Rights Division, CRD, it is a resource for filing a claim, for having complaints investigated, and to gather information on what your rights are. There's also the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission. I think it's at 210 West Temple Street is one of the locations. It's downtown in what's also the federal court building. And that is another place where you can go. They have resource information to assist you. And, I used to be on the EEOC commission, so on the panel, and they would have questions that I would answer for them.
Well,
But
thank you. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think that's the way to do it. And I saw in the chat, someone asked, they said in California, it seems there's a disproportionate number of African Americans that get discriminated against in the workplace, which I agree with. I see a much higher percentage of Black victims from any other racial group. And the way you get protected and the laws that protect you are known as the Fair Employment and Housing Act. And that's found in Government Code Section 12965. And in that section, basically it says you cannot be discriminated against, you cannot be harassed, you cannot be retaliated against, and doing so is illegal. But despite those rules, we see it on a daily basis that they're violated. And so you can file a DFEH, now CRD claim with the state, or an EEOC complaint federally, and that can start the process, or you can see a lawyer and they can do that for you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Allison, any tips around how or resources that people can go to? But really quick before you go, we did drop some of those resources in the chat with phone numbers, links. So please, if you need that, go to the chat because that information is there. Allison, any place you want to recommend where people can go to educate themselves?
Sure. I could plug our organization, the Center for Workers' Rights. I can drop I don't know if the number and email were in the chat, but I could drop that now. So yeah, you could call us. We offer free legal consultations for low-wage workers. So you could call for a clinic appointment if you think you're experiencing a workplace violation. Our assistance is regardless of immigration status, and you don't necessarily have to call just for a clinic appointment. If you're wondering, like, where do I file? Just as Bradley mentioned, some are going to be with the Civil Rights Department. Other claims might be with the Labor Commissioner. If you need a little bit of guidance on where to file or where to take your workplace violation claim, you can also call the center. Like I mentioned earlier, just knowing your rights, that could be attending our trainings that we hold, or trainings in your local community to sort of educate yourself on your workplace rights. And yeah, just making sure that you are keeping an ear to the ground of what's going on in your community and what education opportunities there are for you to know your rights in this time where a lot of fear and a lot of like rhetoric can seem very paralyzing. I think it's more the reason to feel grounded in knowing that the rights are here in California and to know them.
Thank you, Allison. Janae, anything you want to add to that before we go into the audience question and answer?
Sure. Just something small. I think Brad and Allison kind of hit on it. I think in particular, looking at the chat, it's called the FEHA that you all, when we're talking about the Black community, it's FEHA. So if you all want to Google that, I can put that in there. I believe it may have come across. There's so many things that are coming through the chat, which is great. But I think that person would probably want to look at the FEHA, and that's going to be able to provide you with more context. And if you have questions, my email is in the chat. You can feel free to send me an email. I can answer very simplistic questions. I can't answer legal questions because I am not an attorney, but Brad and Allison are. But I can answer very simplistic questions that have to do with the workplace and the impact it may have, because I'm seeing so many different changes in staff. And so my ear and my feet are on the ground. So I see a lot, I'm an empathetic person. So I see where staff are coming from, because I've been a part of a staff before. So the impact that it's having on everyone, I can give more guidance. I can give, some things that should be in your handbook, and if they're not, you have a right as a staff member to ask questions. If you don't understand something in your employee handbook, because a lot of policies are written, and people don't fully understand them, ask questions. The first resource is ask your leadership team, ask HR. HR writes a lot of these policies, so their comprehension of them are very clear. So if you think that you can go to your HR, I'm here. I do provide a service, but I can answer very simplistic questions. And my biggest thing is educating yourself. There's going to be there's a lot in the chat, but I'm pretty sure we're going to have some additional resources to send out to you all after this meeting.
Thank you, Allison. And you know what? Thank you to this panel. Thank you so much for, the transfer of knowledge and sharing the information that you've had. And yes, I do want to lead people back to the chat. There's a lot of information in the chat. Leanna, I can see, has dropped Allison's information for the Center of Workers' Rights, Brad's information, Assembly McKenna, and Janae's email is also in there. And Brad also dropped his phone number, and his email. So guys, please feel free to take these resources. The benefit of these is to have direct access to resources. So please take advantage of it right now. So with that, we are going to move to
I'm sorry, I have one final thought.
Oh, go ahead, Assembly Member.
Yes. I just would like to let you guys know that the California Legislative Black Caucus right now is lobbying to get $25 million put into the Civil Rights Department, because we know that even though you guys have so many rights in the state of California, and that we are different from every place else, they're not like us. And so, but we still want to make sure that we put that money into the Civil Rights Department. So as these things come up, there's money for you guys, because if we don't fund the department, then we really can't fight some of these things. And so just let you guys know that we're there, we're fighting, and we're trying to get this money put into this year's budget, even though it's a tough budget, $25 million to help to do the civil rights work.
Can you fund the courts too? We're down so many judges, they don't have time to handle these cases. They have 700 cases per judge workload, and it really harms the rights of victims of employment cases.
Absolutely. We'll work on that as well.
Thank you.
So one more thing, Assembly Member, how can the community help legislatures move, build, or how do we support and help you advocate? If you could tell me in like 1 minute, because we do want to get to the Q&As and we're touching at 7 o'clock.
Yes, and I'm going to have to run. I have a hard stop because I'm actually at a conference, but I thought this was super important. So how you guys can help me is like we're trying to get this $25 million into the budget. It would be great for you guys to work the California Equity Initiative to write some support letters for our $25 million civil rights ask. Also, the members here, people here on this call, you can also write a support letter, and you could send it into my office just saying, Governor Newsom, we support having $25 million for civil rights actions and for the Civil Rights Department.
All right, we appreciate that, Assembly Member. We will get more information from you. We will be sending out a follow-up, so we will be able to, we'll put a sample template and some information. We'll get back to you. Thank you, Member. I know you have to run. Thank you for your time. we will move to our questions and answers. And so with that, we have a question from Lionel. And I'll open this up to any of the panel members that says, what about unions? Can reaching out to our union representatives be helpful? Anyone from the panel want to take that? Allison?
Oh, I was going to say one little thing about that. Yes, you can. They are there to advocate. I'll let Allison and Bradley speak more, but yes, that's what union workers are for. So I'll let you all take the rest of it.
Yes is the answer.
All right.
Yeah. It depends on the union though, and their philosophy. There are times that unions are afraid or unwilling to get involved. But as a general principle, they are a good source and a good way of helping.
All right, thank you, Brad. Carolyn, I see your question that's a little specific, so I'm going to ask you to reach out to Brad or to Allison with your direct question. I will share it, but I'm going to move on to Derek because it's specific to her. I was fired while on workers' comp, an older worker and the only Black woman in my department, so many levels. What recourse do I have? So I'm sure there's probably some more details that Brad or Allison would have to know to help you understand your recourse. So please take down their information. Brad, Allison, it's Carolyn. She'll tell you she's from the Cal Equity Initiative virtual event, and that is her question. So Derek also has a question. Who do I talk to about senior rights because they are scared because of their performance on the job that affect their rating compared to younger workers? Allison, I know they are in a protected class. Is there anything else that you can share with Derek?
Yeah, I would encourage you to reach out to our hotline. I think a lot of times with these cases, there are protected classes that you can't discriminate against, but California is also an at-will employment state. So that means an employer can fire you at any time for any reason, and in the same way, an employee can quit for any reason. So it's sort of making sure we're asking the right questions to see if there is a case for discrimination. But yeah, I would definitely encourage you to reach out to us or a different legal services organization.
Thank you, Allison. Again, thank you to all of our panelists. I feel like Kiki, did I miss a question or was that all the questions in the chat?
I'm seeing one more.
Okay, can you read it? I'm sorry.
Prior, the BSAP program in LA Unified was dismantled during the Biden administration, and no one fought for the Black students or the program. Will that be revisited? Could you give us just a little bit of context on?
So I actually know about that one. I think that one might have been for Assemblymember McKenna a little bit more. But unless Brad or Allison knows about that program, that was a program for Black students at LAUSD. They've now opened it up to everyone. If you have an answer, that's fine. If not, I would say refer back to Assembly Tina McKenna to see if she has more of an answer. Maybe even reach out to Tony, who is the elected around what is his public instruction. He may have also a better answer for you around that question. So I'm going to wrap up our question and answers and turn this back over to Kiki. I appreciate it. And Kiki, turning it back over to you. Unless, does Allison or Brad have an answer about the BSA program?
I don't have an answer on it directly, but what
Thoughts?
I have seen is, especially since November 5th, there has been a huge increase in the number of acts of violence against Black students in the schools, junior high and high school, and racial slurs. And it seems as if it's focused on those schools where Black students are a small minority, say 3 to 5%. And we have a case with a stabbing, we have cases of beatings, we have lots of racial comments and threats. And we've just been seeing a huge number. Like, I never got cases like that really before, once in a blue moon. And now they're an everyday occurrence. So we certainly have need for all that kind of protection.
Thank you, Brad. Just for the essence of time, we're running over, so thank you for everybody who has stayed with us. Kiki, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Appreciate everyone for
Yes,
being
thank
here.
you. And thank you, Shauna, for facilitating that conversation. Thank you to our panelists for joining us. I will get us out of here. I know we're out of time, so we'll just jump right into it. We have had such a great time. I have had such a great time in this space, learning from you all, learning from our panelists, and we really want to stay connected. So many of you have so many great ideas and so many questions that didn't get to be answered in this session, but we have a ton more that you can get involved in, and we'd like to keep the momentum from this. So, some action items after this. If everyone wants to pull out their phone and follow Cal Equity on Instagram, that's where a lot of our content is, and a lot of our educational resources will be posted there as well. Utilize the resources and tips you learned about today. We'll follow up with an email with all the contact information and resources that we talked about today. You can sign our letter of support found at calequity.org. We have a lot of good stuff on the website. Take a look. And then we have a few upcoming events in our series that we would love to have you attend. Our next one will be about equity in housing and insurance. But I think given what we heard from you all today, we have a ton of ideas on the gaps in public education that we saw even from this conversation. So please reach out to us if you have ideas for our series as well, and any other ideas you may have for Cal Equity as a whole. And so thank you all so much. Please use our panelists as resources. They were amazing in giving us their time today, and just all of you for choosing to be in community with us tonight. This is how you can stay connected with Cal Equity, take a picture, screenshot. But we're just really grateful for all of you in joining the Cal Equity community. So thank you so much. Thank you, our panelists. And I'll see you at the next one.
Thank you
Yes.
for having us.
Oh, you're welcome. And just make sure everyone, you grab the information in the chat for the panelists that was here. Brad has given all his information, Allison and Janae, and then the members' information is also there along with the resources. So thank you all. Have a great night. Appreciate you. Please stay in touch and continue to support Cal Equity Initiative. And thank you guys for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Charles.
Thank you, everyone. That was great.
Thank you. Bye-bye.